everybody. Thank you all for joining us today. This is our very first virtual PFA monthly gathering of the year and ever, I believe. It is the first one for this year, and there will be more to come. But because this is our first virtual gathering, for some of you, you may have been totally accustomed to virtual platforms and virtual meetings. But if this is your first time, I do want to go over some tech housekeeping. Okay, so the first thing is, as I mentioned earlier, for some of you who are already on, today's meeting is a WebEx event. So what that means is that you see all of the panelists who will be speaking today, and you won't be seeing each other. So I do want to let you know right now, as of right now, there's 208 people who are tuned in. So there's over 200 of you who are out there who are viewing this meeting today, and we are all viewing it together. But for this event, you will only be seeing the panelists, and unfortunately, you won't be able to get to see each other. And it is in listen mode only. But however, if you do have a question, we will be having a Q&A at the end of this, at the end of the panelists speaking. And so you will be able to enter your questions into the box at the bottom of your screen. And I'm not sure what your screen looks like, but it should look like a little chat bubble. When you do enter your questions for the Q&A, please address the person to whom you would like the question to be addressed to. Let's see, if you're viewing this webinar from a desktop computer, please be sure to adjust your viewing preferences. So in the top, you have a grid. You could view all the panelists all at once, or there is a speaker mode, which we suggest viewing in. And you could just choose the mode of viewing that you would like. Let's see. If you're viewing from a mobile device, there's also settings as well for positioning your device and viewing mode, but we do sort of suggest that you position your device in a landscape or portrait view. Okay, so hopefully we're all set with our technology. And before we even begin, I want to make sure that we thank Nicole McDonald, who is our IT support person. We really could not have done this without her. I'm not necessary. Hi, Nicole. Thank you so much. So Nicole is behind the scenes, and she's going to help orchestrate all of this. So thanks, Nicole, and the whole IT department for just helping us out today. I am definitely not a tech savvy person, so to have Nicole here to assist us with this, we're really, really grateful for her. So now that we have our technical housekeeping out of the way, I'm Shandis Ching. I am the PFA president for this school year. I have two children at Punahou. One is currently in 4th grade, and the other is currently in 7th grade. And while they miss being on campus, of course, with their friends and their teachers, they have both had a great 2 weeks of distance learning so far. So thank you for joining us today. As I mentioned, well, I'm looking at the attendance right now. We have close to 250 attendees who are here today logged on. And I know we missed gathering in person, but hopefully this was a lot easier for you guys, a simple click. You didn't have to leave work early to fight for parking, walk up the hill and get all hot and sweaty like I would always get hot walking up the hill to the President's Pavilion. And hopefully, you know, even though we aren't able to be together, we are so glad that you guys are here. I also do want to take the time to welcome all of the new Punahou families that might be tuning in for the very first time. We wish that we could greet you guys all in person if we were together at the President's Pavilion, but we are still grateful that you're here today joining us. And I also want to say hi to all of the existing Punahou families who you may have attended many, many monthly gatherings in the past, but this may be, or it should be, your very first virtual monthly gathering. So in many ways, we are all new to this. We're all new to this virtual platform and these new virtual events. A virtual monthly gathering has never been done before. A PFA tradition, such as monthly gatherings, that was a well-oiled machine in the past, all of a sudden was halted. And with the mandate of all of us having to stay home and no in-person gatherings, we still knew that this is something that we wanted to continue to do this year. We would just have to do it in different ways. We'd have to do it in a way that none of us have experienced before. And after many WebEx planning meetings, after many emails back and forth between IT, Leanne, myself, and the administrators that you see here, we have arrived here, and we are so excited and we are grateful to be able to still bring you monthly gatherings in an unprecedented way. In fact, while many PFA traditions and events that we love may look and feel different this year, we are committed to continuing them. We are also striving to create new opportunities and traditions to serve our Punahou community in new ways. This year, above all, the PFA's main goal is to cultivate connection between us all, despite the fact that we're not able to be physically together. We recognize that in these times, we are all experiencing different challenges, and the needs of our Punahou community vary across the board. However, throughout this summer, it became very, very apparent to us, and throughout the first weeks of school, that we heard a resounding need across the board for connection. It is something that many of you, and us included, are craving. So we remain hopeful to continue what is familiar, and also hopeful for possibilities of creating new ways and new traditions to connect this year. So again, thank you for being a part of our very first virtual monthly gathering today and choosing to connect with us and choosing to connect with our administrators. We are very honored to create a year with all of you that will be filled with many firsts together, such as this, but knowing that we will all be experiencing it together. So with that said, I would like to introduce our chaplain, Josh Hayashi, for joining us today to offer a few words of blessing. Just a little bit about Chaplain Hayashi, and I'll let him expand as well. But he works primarily with our middle school students in grades 6 through 8. He's been at Punahou since 2008, and he also has a daughter in 7th grade alongside my daughter. So Chaplain Hayashi, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Shandis. Thinking about your comment about things changing and yet staying the same. As I was preparing my remarks before this, I realized I started to get hungry, because usually these PFA events I have to do around lunch. I'm thinking, oh, what are we gonna eat? And so that I guess is that conditioned response that we think PFA and I think lunch. So I'm just glad to be here. It's an honor to be with all of you. And so in the midst of everything that's happening in these challenging and unprecedented times, I'm going to ask all of us to close our eyes and to take a moment to reflect. While we reflect, I want you to think about or bring to mind maybe 2 things or people that you are grateful for today. Our holy God, in the midst of everything that is happening, still so many things and people to be grateful for. Bless each one here, wherever they are, in whatever circumstances they are, and all the people that they love. In your name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Chaplain Hayashi. Yeah, it's so easy to think about people that we're grateful for, more than 2 people. So today we are fortunate to have Punahou's administrators welcome us to the start of this school year. I have the pleasure of giving you a little bit of introduction and bios and background on our panelists before each of them present today. So I'm going to go ahead and read their background, and once they begin speaking, they will start to introduce each other as they start speaking. But our first presenter will be President Mike Latham. You want to wave? I'm sure everybody knows who you are. Dr. Latham began his tenure as the 17th president of Punahou School on July 1st of 2019, after an accomplished academic year as an educator and college administrator. Prior to returning to Hawaii, Dr. Latham, a 1986 graduate of Punahou, served as the vice president for academic affairs at Grinnell College in Iowa, a nationally ranked liberal arts college known for innovative teaching. He previously served as professor of history and the dean of Fordham University's College at Rose Hill in New York. Dr. Latham holds a PhD in history from UCLA and is a widely respected scholar of American relations. Following Dr. Latham will be Dr. Jinya Liu. Jinya, you want to give a wave? Thanks, Jinya. Jinya started as the Director of Analytics and Planning in June of 2020. By training, she is an epidemiologist and a program evaluator and has worked previously with CDC, WHO, and the Gates Foundation. She is currently a co-chair of the pandemic response team. Her son, Ben, started as a 2nd grader at Punahou this year. Dr. Liu, a 1992 alumni, received her AB in chemistry, magna cum laude from Harvard University, and her PhD in epidemiology from the School of Public Health from the University of California, Berkeley. Speaking after Dr. Liu will be Dr. Emily McCarren. Emily, you want to give a wave? Dr. McCarren is the Academy Principal, and prior to that, she was the Director of the Wool International Center at Punahou. She founded and led global education conferences for educators, launched an after-school world language program, and supported the school's global education partnerships and curriculum. Dr. McCarren has also taught high school students Spanish, math, and science in Switzerland, California, and Hawaii. Dr. McCarren holds a master's degree in Spanish literature and educational leadership from St. Louis University and Columbia University, and a PhD in learning design and technology from the University of Hawaii. She is a co-author of a series, Take Action Guides to World-Class Learners, and serves as Vice Chair of the Board of Global Online Academy and the Vice Chair of the Board of Mastery Transcript Consortium. Dr. McCarren speaks to audiences globally about her passion, leadership, and action towards educational change and the moral imperative to provide our students with the schools they deserve and the world with the school it needs. And lastly, we have Dr. Dr. Priore-Kim. You want to give a wave? Dr. Priore-Kim is a graduate of Punahou, class of 1976. He holds a BA from Princeton University, as well as a master's in education and an Ed.D. from the University of Hawaii. She began her career at Punahou as a 7th and 8th grade social studies teacher. And following that, she worked in the Luke Center for Public Service as Associate Dean before becoming Academy Dean for the classes of 2011 and 2015. She has been serving as the junior school principal since the fall of 2015. So before I invite our panelists to speak, and I invite Dr. Latham to start us off, in the spirit of connecting in ways that we wouldn't normally be able to do if we were gathered at the President's Pavilion, I have asked each of our speakers to share something from their personal spaces that today are speaking to us from today. So it might be something meaningful, it might be something fun, but we thought we would invite them to give us a little glimpse into something that we might not ordinarily be able to see had we been gathered together at the President's Pavilion. So I'm going to ask Dr. Latham to start it off. And before each speaker goes, we are going to ask you guys to also start off by sharing something interesting from your spaces today. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, everyone. It's really great to see you all. Aloha and welcome. I'm always so happy to have the chance to talk with the PFA. You know, it's such an incredible organization, both in terms of the work that's done in supporting so many Punahou events and programs, but also I think really a body with tremendous insight and experience. I even think about myself as a parent, and there are so many things that I come to understand and learn about Punahou more as a parent than I do actually in my administrative role. And I'm really, really delighted to be with you all. You know, Shandis asked me to show you something from my office, and so I picked out this really interesting, fascinating piece of art, and I'm hoping if I hold it up that you'll actually be able to see it here. So this is a Manu Oku, which was made by Leighton Lamb, and Leighton, some of you know, is a member of the Punahou family who actually has done a great deal of art on our campus. In fact, the star compass that you see in the hale that's now close to the lily pond where the waterfall comes down, Leighton was the person who did the work on that star compass. And I really love this Manu Oku. It's got a lot of detail to it. And if you look carefully, you can actually see some interesting things within it. He's got sort of a piko here, representing some continuity between the past and the future. And then if you look carefully, and I'll turn the bird upside down here, get him actually right side up. So I'll pick up the bird here so you can see it better. You can see there's some dolphins actually embedded into the wings, which are very cool looking. I just think it's a really remarkable piece of art, something that I have really enjoyed. And those of you who walk around the campus, you've probably seen those white nesting terns flying around at various points. In fact, there was a baby one which was nested in a tree right next to Bishop Hall, which I've been watching over the past several weeks, actually, as I walk back and forth to where I live. And this morning, the baby was not there. So the baby decided that it was time to take flight. So that was, I thought, an auspicious sign. But it's really been an exciting time to be at Punahou and to be with all of you. And I'm really, really pleased to be here. There are a couple things that I want to talk about in terms of our return to school. And I'm going to start by framing things fairly broadly, and then I'll talk a little bit more specifically about our response to the pandemic and our response to some of those challenges. You know, I think when the pandemic broke and the news began to unfold that we were going to have a serious and lasting challenge to grapple with, we framed two goals that I want to talk about this morning. The first was that we really wanted to retain all of our current and newly enrolled students. And we knew that the pandemic was going to create a major economic downturn, which it certainly has. And that's something that's unfolded and hit Hawaii in particular quite hard. And we wanted to retain all of our students even in the midst of that challenging moment. And so one of the things that we did was that we substantially increased the amount of financial aid that we make available to our students, recognizing our belief and our conviction that we want to enable students to pursue a Punahou education regardless of their family circumstances. So far, we've allocated a major increase in financial assistance. Last year, we allocated a little bit less than $8 million. In fact, last year it was $7.7 million. So far this year, we've allocated $10.5 million. And we have significantly increased the percentage of our students who receive financial aid. Now it's from jumping from about 20%, 1/5, out to 25%, a quarter. And we're really very proud of that fact. I think that goal for accessibility is really crucial. I'm also very proud of the fact that Punahou is fully enrolled, even in this challenging circumstance. And we're really very grateful to the alumni, to the parents, to the others who have made that possible. Their donations, their commitment to support the school at a moment of really significant need, their commitment to our community, has enabled us to provide those resources. And that's also been part of a wider strategy that Punahou has unfolded in terms of being financially responsible too. Paring back our operational budgets, we've frozen all of our employee salaries, we've deferred a lot of capital projects and done the kinds of things that we think are financially responsible so we can concentrate on our core mission to support our students and our families. And I'm very grateful to all of you, many of you who've supported us in doing that. Our second big goal was to preserve academic excellence and continuity, even amid the significant disruption. And that's a topic that I know we'll spend a significant amount of time today talking about. The key elements of that, of course, are a goal for us to find a way to deliver an outstanding education in any situation or circumstance. And to do that, we wanted to calibrate our school's operations and pedagogy to the conditions of the pandemic, to come up with a structure that would allow us to move up and down the ladder in terms of our operations, depending on what's happening both externally and internally. And finally, we also wanted to build a structure that would be durable as well, an approach that would enable us to respond to risks. And even after we return to campus, if we were to encounter infections among our population, that we would have the opportunity to weather those kinds of challenges, potentially taking a cohort or a separate group of students into quarantine, enabling them to recover, and then coming back without having to revert into full distance learning. All of this, of course, has required a lot of very intensive and thoughtful and integrated planning. And the panelists that you're going to hear from today have all been key players in that process. And This thinking actually began, honestly, back in February. This is something that we've been dealing with and thinking carefully about and planning for months. And Ginia and Paris and Emily have all played integral roles in helping us think about how best to achieve the kind of continuity of education that we aspire to. I also want to acknowledge that many of you, in fact, probably within the past hour, received from me an announcement that went out to all parents, to all families, indicating, providing an update really around our plans for a return to school. And it indicated our expectation that at this point, we believe that may be possible on the order of October 5th. That our hope is that by October 5th, it might be possible for us to return and that we would have the opportunity to resume operations on campus about that time. Now, obviously, that's going to depend upon the pandemic conditions that we're dealing with. And as the letter I sent out indicates, we're in an environment of significant volatility. There's a lot of instability in terms of the data, a lot of instability in terms of the way the pandemic is developing and being managed within the state of Hawaii and on the island of Oahu. And all of that is something we have to take into consideration. At this point, we believe that we're going to need a little bit more time to see and evaluate the impact of the measures that are currently in place. That would include the government stay-at-home order, the limits on group gatherings, the temporary closure of businesses. All of those steps, we hope, are going to help us suppress, as a community, more widely, help us suppress the evidence of the pandemic. But we need some time to see a stable and consistent trend to evaluate the effect and the extent to which those measures are working. And so as the letter indicates, we're hoping to see a substantial reduction in the positivity of testing, looking for consistent figures lower than 5%, which would meet the World Health Organization standards for reopening. We'd like to see a sustained and significant reduction in daily caseloads over a 2-week period. And we'd like to see broad public access and opportunities for testing, as well as an effective contact tracing program. All of these are things which we believe and are very hopeful will enable us to return to campus soon. And at this point, October 5th is a date that we think is certainly a possibility. I also want to point out that our note indicates, and we'll be happy to talk about this a little bit more as well, our note indicates that we will offer to families an at-home learning option if they would like to pursue that. That would mean that regardless of what pandemic tier we're in, and regardless of whether or not, in fact, Punahou has restarted instruction on campus, there may be some families who, for a variety of reasons, would prefer that their child learn from home. And we're going to be providing that option. We'll share more information and detail about how that would work and how to sign up very soon. But for now, I'm going to stop there. We're really looking forward to your questions. And I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Liu to discuss how the pandemic is interpreted and to talk a little bit about the significance of the data for our school. I also want to take this opportunity to express my personal gratitude to Dr. Liu. We recruited and hired her as our new director for analytics and planning, and she's played a crucial role in helping us begin our strategic planning process. But the fact that she is a professional epidemiologist, that she holds a doctorate in the field and has extensive experience working for the CDC and the Gates Foundation and the WHO as well, has been such a blessing for our whole community. And she's just been a fabulous partner to collaborate with. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Ginia, and we'll look forward to our conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Mike. And it's really a pleasure to be here and join this gathering. It's my first PFA meeting, even as a parent. And so I'm really happy to be here and talk with you all. Just to sort of continue on Shandis's idea, I wanted to share what I have at my desk. I'm still pretty new, so moving into my office, but what I always have handy is my keyboard brush because I tend to eat a lot at my desk and get a lot of crumbs and I don't want to ruin my computer. So that's what I have at my desk to share. I'm just going to share a few slides, and I think part of what I wanted to talk about or sort of start off my comments on is just to give people a slightly more concrete idea of how we've been looking at the data that we've been using to really determine what COVID alert tier we're at, and thinking about how we design practice in classrooms to make sure that it's safe for all our students and families and our faculty as well. I'm just going to share a few slides to go through sort of the conceptual ideas that we use in making this determination. And what I wanted to sort of frame for you is the way that we've been thinking about how we can quantify the risks that we have at campus, and how we can really put measures into place that will be effective in really preventing and mitigating the potential for transmission to happen on campus. And the two ways we can block out different types of risk. There's many sources of risk, as you know, and we are dealing with a situation of some uncertainty and understanding how COVID is transmitted. But for the data that we have and the information that we have, and what we continually to update our knowledge, we can sort of quantify risk looking at two big buckets. The first thing that we need to think about is, what is the prevalence of active COVID-19 disease in the population? Because our risk is really determined by the likelihood that we're going to encounter a person that's infected in our day-to-day life. And so for students, that means who they might interact with on campus in their classrooms, and the same for faculty. And then when we're at home, who's in our bubble that we might be in contact with and have the kind of interaction that might lead to transmission. So of course, if we were in a situation where we didn't encounter anybody who was infected, our risk and the kind of interaction that we could have could be as we had normally and before COVID-19. So really understanding what the likelihood of meeting somebody who has active disease, the people that we interact with daily, is a really critical aspect of thinking about risk. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we try to quantify that and how we use that in both determining the COVID tier that we're in, but also thinking about how other mitigating factors that we can put into place to make sure that that prevalence of the people that are on campus is very low. And then once we think about the prevalence of COVID-19 in the population that we might interact with, the other big set of risk factors have to do with what is the probability of actual transmission when in contact with an infected person. So we know that just because somebody's infected and they meet another person that's uninfected, there is not necessarily transmission that's going to happen. There are a number of things that we can put in place, and we all know about the things around distancing and masks and things like that. There's other measures that we've put into classrooms to help control that as well. And so those are the different ways we can think about risk. Let's go back to that first issue, though, of thinking about what is the prevalence of active COVID-19 in the population, and how do we get at that? You know, we are limited to the kind of data that we have. Really, the state has been putting out the daily number of cases that are diagnosed, and that's a really helpful indication, but we need to process that to be able to really calculate some measure of prevalence. And the way that we generally do that is that we think about the number of cases that are diagnosed each day, and then a certain number of them will resolve over time. And the length of infectivity of a person that's infected will change, and it will be different depending on the kind of symptoms they have and the prognosis of their disease. But the state does put out the cumulative number of people that are diagnosed, and then they also put out the number of cases that have been resolved. And so those people are no longer considered infectious. And we can take the difference of those two numbers and say those are the active cases of disease that we are aware of and that have been diagnosed. But because we also know that not everybody with a COVID-19 infection will get diagnosed because they may be asymptomatic or have a very mild disease, or maybe have poor access to healthcare, we tend to inflate that number to give us a better estimate of what the active number of cases might be in our community. And we can do this for the state of Hawaii, but for our purposes, for Punahou, we really think about what is the number of active cases that might be on Oahu, because that is the more likely population that we might be in touch with in our school community, or the people that are coming to campus. So if we take that active number and we inflate it by a factor of 10, which is a general rule of thumb that we often use in epidemiology for these kinds of disease, thinking about the way these data come in. We inflate that number by 10, and then we divide that by the general population size. And when we calculated this number back in July, when the cases were when we were at the point where we decided to move to the orange tier level, the level of infection that we saw was about 0.7% on Oahu. And so that means generally, if you look at this little square on the left, Of 100 people, maybe 0.7 of those people would be infected. And of course, infection doesn't really work that way, but that just gives you a sense of what it means when you interact with 20 people or 25 people or 100 people. What is the likelihood that you might encounter somebody who's infected? And that's what a 0.7% kind of looks like. Now, that's what the population prevalence might be. And that was what we calculated to be back in the middle of July. But we know that that's not exactly the prevalence that's going to be in our community. And one of the really important measures that you hear us talking about is how the sick policy that we have at school will really make a big difference in reducing the risk of transmission on campus. And that's because by people that are symptomatic, that have some type of illness, staying home. And we know that the proportion of symptomatic disease in the population, it varies, but it might be around 75%. We can see that by having a very strongly enforced sick policy, that's a really important role and partnership that we have with families, and the contribution that families can make to really help us be safer on campus. So by paying attention to the sick policy, really keeping your children at home when they're ill. We know that not all ill children have COVID-19, but we think that by keeping ill people at home, both students and employees, we are able to cut down the prevalence of people that might be on campus that have COVID-19. And that's a really important part of our strategy and our safety strategy. And so just to give you a sense of it, in a classroom of about 25 people, what is the likelihood that one of those people might have COVID-19? And in this kind of scenario where we're operating in orange, we feel that that risk is quite low. But of course, that's not the only thing that we're doing to have safety. And this measure also has to do with the way that we've controlled the mixing of the cohort. So as you know, in the K-8 group, there's a very limited pod of children that other students will be in touch with. And that pod is kept throughout the day over time. And so that really limits the number of other people that students will be in touch with, and faculty for that matter, so that their risk of exposures also remains low. So this was the level that we were back in July. If we think about what is the level that we are here when we're sort of in this deep red level, on August 14th, when we did this calculation again, it changed from 0.7% in the general population of Oahu to about 2.8%. And you can see this is a really large increase. We're at a point right now where the trajectory of the epidemic, we hope, is coming down, that the stay-at-home order is being effective. But of course, we want to be able to track the number of active cases in the population, to know that the prevalence of people that are likely to come to campus is going to be quite low, and something that we can really make sure that our prevention strategies are effective against. And so that's the reason why we really pay attention to the case numbers, and we need to see that sort of 2-week trend to make sure and have confidence in the level of prevalence in the population that will be coming to campus. So let's go to that other big bucket of risks that we try to quantify, and that's related to the probability of transmission if an infected person is in contact with us. There are two sort of big areas about it: the infectiousness of that person that's infected, the susceptibility of the uninfected person. Those kinds of things are not really in our control, but the information that we know about those things are that, generally it's important to understand that later stages of infection have lower risk, that people that are asymptomatic tend to have a lower risk of infectiousness to others. There have been some data that suggests that there is lower transmission among those under 10. That those data still need to be, more data need to be collected about that, but there's some hopeful information about that. We also think that there is a lower susceptibility of children, younger people, and so that's something that we also take into consideration. But the areas of this type of risk that we really have a lot more control over and have been influencing the way we design classroom practice have to do with the amount of virus that is transferred when an infected person is in contact with another person. And as you know, distance is a really key factor in reducing the amount of virus that's transferred between two people. We know from the data that 1 meter distance makes a difference. Of course, 6 feet is more ideal, but every amount of distance added to that does reduce risk. And that's something important to think about as we plan the way students are interacting with each other and with their teachers. We know that we can put up barriers, the use of masks and face shields, partitions, especially when students are eating lunch in the classroom, other barriers related to hand hygiene, so to reduce the transmission of people contacting, touching their face or their mouth and then touching other things that other people can then touch. An enhanced cleaning schedule. We've also paid a lot of attention to the ventilation systems and HVAC in our classrooms to avoid sharing air between classrooms, to have antivirucidal measures such as ion emitters and UV filters. So those kinds of things will also make a big difference in the environment and reduce the amount of virus that's in the classroom environment. And then, of course, we also know that the duration of an infected person and an uninfected person being together in close contact without these barriers is also a key factor in this risk and amount of virus transferred. And so the effort made to do supervised movement, to have very intentional small group work in the classroom, to avoid children and students from just sort of mingling together in an unsupervised way that might lead to transmission. Those are all things that are taken into consideration and really inform our classroom practice. And so I hope these kinds of measures, or the discussion of these measures, helps you get a sense of how we've considered reducing risk at many stages, the structural approaches that we've put into place to make classrooms safe, and then also, I think, maybe help you understand the role of families in helping us to really reduce risk, especially in the issue of staying home when sick. So I'll stop there, and I'm happy to answer more questions as we have more dialogue, but I'll hand it over to Emily at this point.
Thanks, Ginia, and thanks so much to everyone for being here. Ginia is such a fabulous teacher of this work. We've been so grateful for her support as we design the safest possible school environment we can. I'll start by sharing something in my attic home office here. This, I don't know if you can see it, it's a glass bowl and it has this funny little ball stuck in the bottom of it, which is also made out of glass. So this was, you may have wanted this too, because this was an item that was up in the silent auction in Carnival last year. And it was made by our students in a collaborative glass blowing G-term last year. So this was a G-term class, which is G-term's a 3 or 4 day experience in the academy each year where kids get to try something they haven't tried. This particular class brought together students who are experts in glass blowing and who have never done glass blowing before. And they had to collaboratively create something that used all of their strengths and creativity. And they made this really funny, kind of useless bowl. You can't really put anything in it because there's this ball stuck in the bottom, but I just love it. And I stare at it all the time and think about all the fabulous things that our kids can create when we let them loose. So in terms of the Academy's approach to this fall, I just want to sort of briefly talk you through the work we've been doing over the last, as Mike said, really the last 5 months. And starting in March, when we knew we had to move to this remote distance learning, we really began really actively surveying kids and families and trying to figure out, okay, how do we improve at this thing that we've never done before? And from the spring, we gathered a lot of insights about how to best serve kids, particularly in a distance learning context. And then over the summer, we turned our attention to preparing for each of the pandemic tiers. So as Ginia discussed, and as you all know from reading the communications this summer, we have the red tier, the orange tier, the yellow tier, and the green tier. And we really wanted to make sure that our students' experience across the tiers was smooth. We created a system that is actually a lot of work for us on the faculty and administration side, but for students and families, we think we've done a good job in creating something that allows their learning to continue and be smooth and transition between the tiers, which of course we hope to do really soon. We're all eager to get our kids back to campus. So in terms of optimizing what we learned from the spring, we knew that we had to create a schedule where hopefully in the academy, kids had fewer classes at a time. We heard from a lot of students and families that the cognitive load of having lots of classes and being at home was complex. So we also wanted to make sure that our teachers had the work of supporting a smaller group of students at a given time, if possible. And so we created a schedule that's a mixture of semester-long classes, which run for the whole, August through December semester, and block classes. And the block classes are intensive classes that meet just 2 hours a day for 5 or 6 weeks at a time. And we want to make sure also that every kid could take all the classes they had signed up for in the spring or over the summer. So we're in the early, the first few weeks of that schedule, and we're about this afternoon to send a survey to students to get their feedback. We're also, once we sort of look at that first round of feedback from kids, we'll start to gather parent focus groups to learn from your experiences. One of the questions that we had in the question form that accompanied this meeting was, where is, Punahou's suggestion box? And actually, I think it's our emails. So, if you have things that come up that you want to share, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, and know that we will be gathering your feedback systematically over the course of the fall. In terms of our teachers' work over the last several months, in late February, we had about 4 teachers who were of our 180 faculty in the academy who were experienced in online education. And now we have 180. And there's just been incredible work on the part of our faculty over the last few months to really figure out, okay, how do we achieve the same learning outcomes that we aspire to achieve on our beautiful campus in this context? We learned from the input and opportunities to learn this past spring. This summer, as many of you know, our entire summer school program in the academy operated online. We had the support of consultants from the Global Online Academy who have been working closely with a group of teachers. We also had all of our teachers taking courses and doing professional development. And we've really, really devoted ourselves to creating community in this context, to ensuring that kids' deep learning is enduring. And we're going to be continuing to measure those things and make sure that we're confident we're doing the best we can. So I look for, please encourage your kids to respond to the survey that they'll get over the next 24 hours from me. And I look forward to hearing from all of you especially about your academy students' experience over the next couple of weeks. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my dear colleague, Paris, so you can check out her home office.
Thanks so much, Em. I think you've seen my home office in recent and past videos, but you probably haven't seen this. This is my very special object. It's called the Nutshell Library. There are these 4 teeny tiny volumes by Maurice Sendak. You might recognize, this is Pierre. There's alligators all around. There's chicken soup with rice. I received these when I was a small person. I'm still a small person. I was a smaller person. I was a child. I've had them for almost 60 years. And they have traveled with me from my home in Honolulu to college, to New York, to Paris. They've been on every desk I've ever worked at for almost the last 60 years. Because they were given to me by my father and first read to me by my father and my mother alternately, and then read by me to them. And they conjure so many amazing memories, as I'm sure, like the ones you're creating with your children when you curl up to read. But they also represent a connection to that child that I was and still sort of am, but not very many folks know about. I was a very, very shy child and took my refuge in books for much of my life. They were the easiest friends for me to make. And I think it's that is so potent about this little memento, is that they continually place me in touch with that very shy inner child, which I'll never forget and always look to honor and recognize in the other little humans that I might potentially meet. So moving on to, thanks for giving us that opportunity, Shandis. That was a really lovely walk for me down memory lane. First and foremost, I just want to acknowledge that your faith and hopefulness and patience have contributed so much to a really wonderful launch of the school year. You represent so much of what is good about Punahou. And as Emily mentioned, it's your insights and the insights of other parents that really helped us from the spring to inform our current design and architecture for this new way of doing school. Core principles that emerged from that and that have really guided our design for this year, in whatever tier we end up, are connection and community, continuity of learning, and of course we also want to pay really close attention to physical, emotional well-being of our students and our faculty. So starting with community and connection, we want to pay attention to things like engagement, relationships, a sense of belonging, all the things that were important to us, that remain important to us, whether we're on or off campus. And we really wanted to leverage the social aspects of learning. That was one thing that we really recognized was challenging in the spring. They hold so much importance for children on campus, and we needed to recreate them off campus. So our faculty really spent a lot of time building up facility with a lot of online tools and services that help us do that. So you'll see our faculty using tools that support things like group discussions, group thinking, sharing, dialogue between kids online. You'll see tools that create opportunities for students to collaborate in classrooms, on teams, and as classroom communities. Students are also broadening their own skills for demonstrating their learning in this context, for presenting it digitally and participating in a community of learners that way. Another really important lever for conveying this sense of belonging is the one-on-one conversation. That those kinds of things happen throughout the day with teachers when we're on campus, and they are continuing in the off-campus context. So teachers still, I saw a beautiful little exchange between a teacher and a child. Child says, I'm cutting out now because I'm not really that interested. Teacher writes back immediately, tell me a little bit what would help you. Kid said, I think I probably need to take a couple of breaks every now and then. Thanks so much for asking. And the teacher wrote back and said, thanks so much for letting me know. Let's plan on doing that. Maybe you can give me a hand signal when you need a break. So these wonderful little, micro conversations are still happening the way they do in the sort of interstitial moments of the day, of the school day. Another thing that we learned is that we really needed to provide simple and consistent structure in our schedules. So although our K-5 and 6-8 schedules look different, I want you to know that they're both meant to offer a reliable pattern of synchronous instruction, independent work, time away from the device and the screen, and time for teachers to provide individual and or small group support. So in the K-5 schedule, you have a very, predictable and regular instructional blocks. And in the middle school, we have a block schedule like the Academy does to achieve sort of the same things: reduction in cognitive load, easier management, and support deep learning. In both of those cases, even though the patterns and the cadence might shift, that built-in structure of direct instructional time, independent work, time away from the device, and time for teachers to support smaller groups should occur across grades K through 8. Health and sustainability remain crucial. So the instructional blocks on the schedules do not equate to screen time. As I said, they're going to be slightly different patterns between K-5 and 6-8, but that rhythm that I described, explicit instruction, time away, independent work, maybe a regroup at the end, breaks in between activities, those things should be present in your children's daily experiences. And I just want to remind you that, as always, communicating directly with your child's teachers, asking questions, advocating for your child, speaking with your child's deans, those are really, really welcome. They're expected. We want you to do that. It's not complaining. it really, really helps us know how to support your children in the ways that they need to be supported. And that doesn't change. So don't think that if something comes up, it's because, this is a different setting. And so you can't ask the child's teacher or a dean about the amount of homework. That's the same. You can ask those very, very same questions, even though the shape of school feels different. And I hope that I'll be able to field more of your questions. I tried to embed some answers to the questions that I saw in my sharing right now, but I look forward to answering more when we break into our panel, which is, I think, coming up. So thanks so much for being here and for your ongoing faith and encouragement and participation in your children's learning. Thanks so much. Shandis?
Thank you so much, you guys. You've answered a lot of questions I know that many of us parents have had in our minds. I also want to thank you guys for sharing your personal items from your offices. I learned a lot about many of you, and just thank you for giving us a glimpse into that. Right now, I would actually like to ask and invite Sani Weldon, who is from our Parent Enrichment Committee, to turn on her camera. Sani, thank you for being here today. Sani will be moderating the Q&A section. So I do see that there have been some questions submitted. If you guys have questions that you would like to submit, you could go ahead and submit them in the Q&A chat box, and we will try to get through them as best as we can. And thank you for those who have also submitted questions prior to today's meeting. So Sani?
Thank you, Shandis. Actually, before we get started, I'd like to ask you a very quick question that also came through online. Will this WebEx be recorded and available after the meeting?
The answer is yes. And it will be provided. I don't know exactly how it will be provided, but we will communicate that. Thank you for asking.
Thank you. Okay, great. I am excited to be moderating this panel. We have many, many questions. Often the questions have to do with the same sorts of topics, so I'll do my best to summarize if you don't hear exactly the words that you submitted. So I'm going to get started right away with a question for, well, I guess some of these have sort of been answered in your talks earlier today, but there are just some caveats. So Dr. PK, if you would, Punahou has a fabulous reputation for being in the forefront of having the best learning environment based on the latest research. And some parents are wondering, is there research behind the way we have structured the style and the schedule of this distance learning program?
Good question. With regard to the middle school schedule, there is research around block schedules, and there's research, and there's actually a model, Ted Sizer's Essential Schools, that a number of schools have used. And our middle school schedule approaches that with obviously some tailoring for Punahou's pedagogy and resources. So there is research around that sort of deep dive for deep learning, for the transfer of learning that can take place in a block schedule. There is less research around distance learning for elementary schools. And in fact, Emily's bio mentioned an affiliation, a super strong affiliation, thank goodness, with the Global Online Academy. And my admin team and I are engaged in working with them and with other elementary school administrators to really try to provide more information, more learning around teaching in this way in elementary schools. Fortunately, this goes less to the schedule. I will say that as far as the schedule was concerned, I think that we took our design, as I said, largely from information about that we got from the spring, the kinds of the sort of predictability that we thought both children and parents needed. But I would say a lot of the ways that we've incorporated online tools actually constitute best practice, not only in distance learning, but in in-person learning. So a lot of the tools that we're using for formative assessment, a lot of the tools that we're using for children to make their learning visible A lot of the tools, the online tools that allow us to personalize are deemed really, really important and beneficial to kids in any context. I hope that helps answer that a little bit more.
I think so, yes. The next question is slightly related. In fact, any of you could probably answer, but this one was directed to Dr. Liu. As a parent, I'm concerned about the effects of the long duration of screen time and the lack of exercise for kids. I can see the frustration and anxiety mounting by just having to sit in their seats for so long and not being able to release their tensions. So do you, I know that you mentioned that you, in the schedule, have set up many opportunities for breaks, but you can't, it's not that easy to make kids exercise in those breaks when oftentimes they want to run off and get a snack or something like that. So do you have suggestions for parents to help their kids move a little?
I can start and Paris can build on this. It's critical that as parents in our homes, this is something that we're prioritizing. In our curriculum, of course, movement is part of what kids are experiencing. In the academy, if they're taking a PE class, if they're involved in a sport, which of course is still happening, but in a distance context. But the school can't provide 100% of that. Families have to take on this responsibility. And so whether this is going for a walk with your kids around the block, at the beginning of the day, you build it into your routine, you go for a bike ride, go to the beach, go swim. It's just so important. And even for us as adults, like normally in a normal day, we move around campus and movement is just part of how our work is accomplished, and that's taken away. So we all have to think really carefully about how we do that in our lives and do it for our kids.
Thanks, Emma. Couldn't agree more. We will be offering, and I know this happens sort of in the course of the curriculum in the academy, but we're going to be offering some strategies for brain breaks and physical breaks. That'll be actually coming up in another weekly communication from our PE specialists. I also just want to take that one step further. And, sometimes you might see, particularly your elementary, well, any child, but particularly your elementary age child who stands up, just walks away from the screen and doesn't want to go back. I just want you to know that happens in classrooms. Children's attention spans vary, and that is a signal that that child needs to move and needs to stretch and needs to step away. So, I recognize that sometimes a child might be leaving their activity and coming in and, tapping you or asking you for something, and it may seem not like the right thing, but actually that is kind of what happens throughout the day with kids. So just want to normalize that and let you know that when they sort of split on their own accord, that's another way that they're getting that natural movement in unorchestrated ways. I mean, it might be a good idea to say, hey, take a lap around the house, or go look out the window and, do I Spy for X, Y, or Z, or step into the backyard, or do 25 jumping jacks, or can I do 25 jumping jacks with you? Anyway, just want to normalize that kind of impulse from kids.
Thank you. I have a COVID-related question here. There's a parent that mentions they learned in the Star Advertiser that Les Jardins has their own contact tracers for their school. Does Punahou have a system such as this in place, or could Punahou support state efforts on contact tracing? Dr. Liu?
That's a question I can really take. So what we've developed for school, and we're implementing it now as we have employees on campus that are doing critical work. As you know from the announcements that have been made, and that's also in the student handbook, we're asking all students and employees if they are infected with COVID, a contact of someone infected, or if they've just gone for testing, to notify the school. And what that does is helps definitely give us information to sort of monitor and track. But as we come back to campus, that will also be a critical tool for us to make sure that campus is safe. And so when we get notified of somebody that's infected with COVID, whether they be an employee or a student, then we do initiate a very rapid process for doing the kind of contact tracing for exposures that happened on campus. So we do have a process. We have a team of people that are trained. As you know, if your family is affected by COVID, if your child is infected, you can notify your child's dean, and that information comes directly to the COVID response team. And then if we were on campus at that time, we would generate all the classrooms and people that student had been in touch with, and we would have a process of notifying all the families that would have been affected. So if their child was exposed in a classroom, they would get a notification the same day. And then there's a whole set of procedures to give families the information that they need, the instructions about how to stay home and quarantine, what they might need to do next, to follow up with their health, to monitor themselves for symptoms, and then what would happen in terms of continuing instruction from home, things like that. So while we are not replacing, the contact tracing that's done by the health department, we do have an action that we can take immediately and probably respond much faster than the health department can when we get that notification. And so this will sort of complement, and it is possible that the health department may contact the families after we already notified them of the exposure as part of their routine contact tracing. But because we aren't able to rely on the rapidity of the health department responding, we are doing that kind of contact tracing and notification for the exposure on campus in a very fast time frame.
That is a relief. Thank you. The next question is for Dr. Latham. Does Punahou publish the educational goals expected for each grade? And would those goals change in the distance learning environment?
It's a really interesting question. I don't think the goals would change. I think our overarching objectives would remain constant. And I'll speak for a couple minutes about, I think, the wider goals. We have K-12, and then I'll invite the principals to talk a little bit more about sort of specific grade level kinds of expectations. I think K-12, we've been thinking a lot about overarching goals in 3 different dimensions, and they're really at the heart of our strategic planning process. The first is we recognize that our kids are going to graduate into a world which is quite different than the one that many of us came of age in. And so we're very interested in students, along with the knowledge that they acquire, developing a set of key abilities and skills and capacities which are going to serve them very well wherever they go and whatever they do. And that moves beyond, it includes, but moves beyond sort of the classic skills in terms of quantitative reasoning and writing ability, analytical talent and skill, but also includes things like creativity and empathy, your ability to collaborate with others, how well you're able to, in many respects, engage in the kind of creative and dynamic thinking that's necessary. We're also very interested in having kids apply what they learn to concrete, authentic, real-world challenges and problems. A lot of our design thinking curriculum, a lot of what we do in engineering, a lot of what we do in different centers on campus and outdoor education, for example, and international education, is designed to help kids draw knowledge from different fields and apply it to concrete problems. And then finally, we're very interested in the social and emotional learning that students need to do. It's really crucial that we graduate students with phenomenal academic skills. Punahou's long done that. We're going to keep doing that. It's vital to who we are and what we do. But we also know that those kids have to grow up and really come of age in a way that enables them to be self-confident, to handle uncertainty and ambiguity, to know how to manage stress and anxiety. So those are some of the overarching goals that I think are fundamental to what Punahou is seeking to achieve. Those are some of the defining characteristics of a Punahou education. Those remain constant whether we're in distance learning or we're in a face-to-face environment. Those elements of how we teach, those elements of our pedagogy are really designed for in a distance learning structure. And we're going to continue to develop those and promote those as best we can. Of course, we're eager to get back onto campus because we have specialized facilities which help us do a lot of that exciting work as well. Some of you are familiar, for example, with the Learning Commons, which is, of course, brand new, the Learning Commons in the COSASA facility. I mean, it's an incredibly dynamic, exciting, world-class engineering and design space. We want to take full advantage of that. That's part of the reason we're eager to get back. But those overarching goals in terms of what we're aiming for, I think remain constant. But to the question about sort of individual grade level goals, I know that in the junior school, there's been a lot of work in that dimension, especially around literacy and math. And I think the Academy has a set of defined expectations and requirements for graduation as well, that certainly we could talk about. But Paris, maybe you can say a little bit about the way that goals are framed in terms of curricular development within the junior school.
Sure. Every grade level establishes, well, every grade level in the elementary school and every department in the, excuse me, middle school develops together a set of what we call learning targets or learning objectives that undergird the content that's delivered over the course of the year. And so they're, again, established grade level by grade level. We expect that, obviously, that children are going to move at their own pace, their own rate. I mean, everybody learns, but everybody learns at their own pace and rate. And so there is the reason why we establish these learning targets is because we want to provide equal access, equity of access to each of the learning targets. It doesn't necessarily mean that every child is going to have hit a mastery level or a high level of proficiency at every single learning target. But over the course of the year, we are checking and remaining accountable to giving children access to those learning objectives and to measuring their progress against those learning objectives every year. That's pre-COVID, current, all the time. And likewise, in the middle school, it happens department by department.
I could just put a point on that. This is something that you'll, as educators, we could talk about for hours. And I think the heart of that question was, are you expecting less of our kids because we're in a distance learning context? And I will say that in March and April and May, yes, we reduced the expectations of our courses. In the fourth quarter of last year, we had adjusted grading policies in the academy. And this year, starting this year, that's not the case. This is school. We have the same expectations we have every year. We've adjusted the way that we deliver the learning environment and the way that it's structured so that we can, we believe, achieve the same outcomes that we would in the event that we're on campus all the time.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I do want to be completely honest. We had a number of questions about the pandemic, the return to school, how you are absorbing the data, analyzing the data and relaying the data. I feel like between Dr. Latham's remarks and Dr. Liu's remarks earlier that you answered pretty much all the questions that came through. So I'd like to direct any of our viewers, if they happen to see this in the video, or to refer back to the video once it's posted for some of those answers. Unless you'd like to add more, of course. The next question that I have is for Dr. PK. There are many parents who are concerned about their child's social interactions, and they're wondering, is the school planning any organized social interactions, working in conjunction with PFA or otherwise, it's particularly outside of their homeroom classroom for middle schoolers?
We'll answer that in general and then talk about, well, I think I can answer it generally, actually. Is that okay? Because it'll apply to both the littles and the middles. One of the things that we've just been talking to the faculty about is we sort of calibrate, right? So much of the first couple of weeks was about just orienting and heard a lot about that experience. And there was a lot of screen time and a lot of sort of heavy lifting during those first few weeks first couple of weeks for both students and faculty. Just spoke last night with Kip Kuhn, Lori Komori, and we've definitely been talking about this in K-5 as well. Now that we're sort of calibrated, where do we create social interactions for kids? Lunch times, lunch buddies. Where can there be rooms? And actually there are currently rooms that are open for kids to populate that way. But I think the middle school in particular is looking at creating cross classroom, cross team experiences for those. So those are absolutely in the works for the middle school. I believe that there was some conversation with the PFA about supporting connections between parents to find pods. Maybe Shandis can say more about that. I'm not exactly sure how far that has progressed. But in terms of what the school is doing, we are looking to leverage our assistant teachers to create recess rooms, space for social interaction, and at the same time, try to balance healthy screen time. So by providing these opportunities, it's social and it's screen. So there has to be a real attentiveness on the parents' part to make sure that some of that activity is off screen.
Yes, and I can address on the PFA side. We definitely have heard the parents' needs to want to connect their children as well as to connect to each other. And as it is right now, email information and things like that are not shared within classrooms, but we are in the process of creating a form that will be sent to parents where you will be able to opt in simply to be able to share your contact information within your classrooms, your pods, your groups. So that is in the works. It should be coming out soon. And there's much more detail involved with that, but that information will come and will most likely be communicated through room parents, team parents, or advisory parents.
I'll just add, in the high school, this is a really big concern for us in the academy. Children's, especially high school age children's social lives is very rarely something that we're designing for. That just sort of happens without our input in most moments. But in this context, we know we have to design for it. So similarly, we're looking at sort of lunch spaces that are kind of open, that kids who might not have those connections naturally, either they're new to the school or they haven't established lots of social connections that they would lean on their own. We're trying to create spaces where those can happen. I think it's important. Also, the clubs are continuing in the academy, although at a distance. So clubs are a really good thing for kids to get involved in. I think we're probably going to nudge all of our kids through homeroom to be involved in at least one club outside of their classes. And I think it's important to acknowledge too, and sort of forecast for you as parents, that even when we return to campus, social interaction is going to be something that we have to be really thoughtful about, because it's not going to happen the way it used to. Kids are not going to have unstructured or unchoreographed time on campus when we return, likely. So we'll have to keep sort of noodling with that over the course of the year in all of the pandemic tiers.
Can I offer just one more addendum, please? Another thing to keep in mind is certainly if your child is new, needs to make friends, I think about, the child that this represented, shy, introverted, naturally. And there are ways, and we've of building up to social connection with our counselors. Just worked with Dr. Alalia Awang in K1 with a family whose child is gradually meeting other kids via Lalia in these very small groups, carefully designed gatherings that are incrementally growing for this child. So if there are deep concerns about an individual child's access to other children, please let the teacher know, and there are strategies that we can use that our counselors can help us with.
Thank you. Dr. Piquet, I have a little bit of a nuts and bolts question for you. When do we get our yearbooks from last year, the hard copy?
So happy that someone asked that. I saw that in the questions. I just now approved the invoice for their printing. So I want to say it's a few weeks up. Yeah, the printer shut down during COVID, but we made arrangements to get them printed as soon as we could find either a new printer or an operation that could do it. And I just approved the PO on today's Friday, Wednesday. So it's underway. I'm sorry I don't have an exact ETA, but just know they're being, they're in process, and we'll get them to you as soon as possible. They're on their way. They're being born.
Thank you. I have one more question for you, Dr. PK. A parent says they understand the middle school student schedule was created to maximize safety if and when students were physically present at Punahou. So the question is, have subsequent discussions occurred to determine if there are any desired adjustments to the schedule now that school has started, distance learning has been implemented?
If I understand that question correctly, I think I'm hearing a question about the schedule being, I mean, the schedule is actually designed for both tiers. As Emily mentioned before, all of our schedules were designed to optimize learning and connection, and all the things that we care deeply about in whatever tier. So I think my response to that.
How could adjustments happen now that it's started, if adjustments are needed?
I'm not sure what kind of adjustments. I mean, adjusting.
I can think of one off the top of my head,
okay,
actually.
Thanks.
Something that came up in our parent-teacher meeting, meet the teacher or something meeting. It was about, in particular, 5th grade has a half hour for lunch. Now the students, the teachers, everybody's having a hard time actually eating their lunch in a half hour and racing to their, so if something like that just isn't quite working right, is there room to change it?
Things like that are very easy to change. We can shift forward or backward. So yes, things like that are very easy to change. Those kinds of adjustments that require, 15 minutes here or take away half an hour there. Yes, we can absolutely make those kinds of adjustments. The kinds of adjustments that are harder to make are more architectural and structural in nature. Like we don't want to have math and English paired. We want to have science and English paired, or those kinds of things. But yes, those certainly. Another question that came up, I think if I'm picking up what you're putting down, is we're really rethinking the afternoon study hall in the middle school, which really was important for circling back and accounting for kids on campus. But we're really wondering if that extra half hour of screen time is necessary in this context. So absolutely. And so if questions like that have not already been raised, they should be, that's the kind of advocacy we want to hear from you regarding what kids need, for sure, kids and teachers. Thanks.
Thank you. You had a lot of questions on this page. So it sounds like there's a concern from a parent whose child may English as a second language. And I don't know how many students are English as a second language students, but is it harder for them to transition in this distance learning environment? Or are there things that you are doing to help them transition?
If they are identified as an English as second language learner, then that would be helpful for us to know. If that is impeding them, I mean, I would imagine if reading fluency is a challenge, if comprehension is a challenge, I would think any environment, we would want to support a child in any environment, on campus or off, under those circumstances. The question I have is, do we know about this child? Has this child been identified to us as an English second language learner? And if not, then that would be really important information for the teacher and the dean to have, so that we can offer the appropriate supports. Because I would imagine that in any setting, if oral or written language comprehension is a problem, we need to know and be able to help.
Yeah, so you recommend parents contact you directly?
Contact the teacher or the dean.
And just to add on that, I think there were a couple questions in the chat and in the comments too about what supports, whether it's counseling or learning support, what's available to kids in this context. And I think the short answer is everything that's available on campus is available in this context too. And so it is really important that parents or students, when they recognize a need for additional support, they reach out to the deans to so that they can be connected with that. In the academy, that's, well, across campus, that's the counselors, that's the learning support. In the academy, we have a bunch of folks sort of on call as academic coaches for students who are needing some additional support. We have a learning strategies class that kids can be enrolled in. So we're really trying to build a really robust system of support and care for kids. And they need to know that it's out there, and they need to make sure that they're connected to the right people.
Thank you. So there are also concerns from parents, and this is for Dr. Latham, whose children may be falling behind during this learning situation. Do you have recommendations for parents who are frustrated with their children falling behind?
You know, I think probably the first place to always start is with the teacher. And, you know, I welcome Paris and Emily's comments here as well. But I think that's really the line of communication that's obviously first and really most central is the conversation with the teacher. It always helps to understand specifically what the concerns are. And I guess one question I would have is, well, falling behind in relation to in relation to what picture, to what standard, would be the first question I would have in my head. But I think the first person to talk to is always the teacher, so that there's some clarity and understanding of exactly what the concern is and how to address it. If a student's running into academic difficulty, a lot of times that conversation with the teacher allows us to identify a need that should be addressed, allows us to figure out how best to support that child. As Paris and Emily were also pointing out, you know, the additional resources we can bring to bear in terms of learning support and counseling are also still all available. And so if a child seems to be running into academic difficulty, seems to be experiencing some difficulties, we need to know as soon as possible, because we want to bring those resources to bear and act as quickly as we can. I don't know if Paris or Emily have other things they might.
I just want to echo what you said. I think what's most important about that is falling behind in relation to what, and the identification of the specific difficulty. That's something that we have more ability to action on. If we know specifically what the concern is with regard to that specific child. They're struggling with X. When they try to do this, they're quickly disinterested. They sit for an hour doing something that the teacher said should probably take them 15 minutes. Things like that that are really specific. So I think the term falling behind is I understand it, I think, in the general context, because as Emily pointed out, you know, there's a comparison to what we know and what have previously experienced and what we're experiencing now. But I think what we want to try to action are those very specific pieces of information that we get about a child's particular struggle now or ever.
Thank you. I have a question also that has been on a lot of our minds on the topic of social interactions a little bit, is what are we planning or thinking about in terms of Punahou traditions such as carnival and flaming pea? And Dr. Latham, would you like to address that?
Sure. You know, those are great questions, and we actually spent a significant amount of time in the past week talking and thinking about them. You know, those traditions really matter, and I think they matter for reasons that sometimes we need to step back and think about. Carnival, I think, you know, Carnival raises a significant amount of funds in support of financial aid, and that allows us to preserve access and do some of the things that we really value. And yet Carnival is clearly more than that objective. Carnival represents the opportunity for alumni, for families, for kids, oftentimes to be shoulder to shoulder working together on behalf of a cause or a project that they really care about. And it creates that deep sense of community bonding and that enduring value. So yesterday we actually had a very productive discussion with the students who were the two junior class students, the Carnival co-chairs. the 2 junior class deans, and the carnival coordinator, Taryn Kabe, and the PFA, or her PFA colleague on staff at Punahou, Leanne Ichimura. And I think it was, as well as our principal, Emily McCarren, it was a really productive discussion. Ginny Liu was part of that as well. And I think one of the things we came to recognize is that at this point, we're dealing with lots of incomplete information. But we can say definitively, we're going to have a carnival. Punahou is going to have a carnival. Do we know at this point what the full dimensions of that will look like? Will we have the E.K. Fernandez rides and the Midway and the rest of that? Well, it's too early for us to say. We don't know enough about how that company is faring. We don't know enough about what the pandemic conditions are going to be in February. I wish I had that kind of foresight. But we're going to have a carnival, and we're going to calibrate what we do to the health conditions that are present at the time. And so just as we've tried to calibrate our school operations to the pandemic conditions, so too we'll think about the scope and range of possibility for carnival in much the same way. Planning alternatives which may in fact reflect some things we know we can continue under any circumstance, and other things which we could then begin to build out and do more assertively from there as conditions allow us to go forward. But we're going to have it because it really, we think, is really so vital to our community. And the other thing I would say to us too is, in some respects, I think this is an opportunity for us to imagine additional dimensions to Carnival. Carnival ultimately, in a big way, is not only about having a great time. It always has been since the 1930s. But it's also about service, and it's an opportunity to serve the community that you're a part of. I would love to see a Punahou Carnival that had some service elements built directly into it, whether that might be opportunities for community engagement in the form of a food drive, whether it might be opportunities for groups of our students and faculty and alumni and parents to do volunteer work in the community of which we're a part. The fact is, we're a school which is in the midst of a community that is facing real economic hardship and challenge. And we have an opportunity to do what we can to go beyond our walls and fulfill, in many respects, I think, our own mission for social responsibility. I would love to see that also become an additional dimension of Carnival, especially as we think about what it means to celebrate our school and its community at this particular point in time. In terms of Flaming P, I think my answer is very similar. We're going to have a Flaming P event. I can't give you a definite sense of the timing, but we're obviously going to have to calibrate that to the pandemic conditions that are present as well. But we're going to have a celebration of our school, of our community, of the family that we're a part of that's going to be meaningful and compelling. So more to come on those, but the planning is underway, and I think they're going to be exciting and compelling, and we're really eager to see what those forms look like.
Thank you. I have a few questions for Dr. Liu. The first is, typically in the fall, Punahou would offer flu vaccinations. Is that something that we're considering this year?
Yeah, that's a great question. This year, flu vaccine is really important, because we don't want a situation where we have both epidemics going on in the same community at the same time. We also know that, we want to prevent people from getting sick generally because we don't want them to miss out on any in-school activities as much as possible. So what we're doing this year to have a safer approach to flu vaccine is we're organizing 2 weekend dates in October to do a drive-through style of flu vaccination operation. And so we're working with partners at Pharmacare. They're setting it up in a safe way so that families can register online, get that all set up, and then come on those specific days. They would park, receive their flu vaccination in their cars. They can be observed. It can be done safely, and then they can drive off campus without having to interact in large groups and things like that. And we're also offering an additional day for our employees so that our community can all take advantage of this. And so that's something really exciting that our health center team has worked really hard on. And we think it'll be a great way to sort of promote flu vaccination, but do it safely and really help this year.
I just want to clarify, would that also be available to parents with this going through summer?
So that's a really great aspect of this campaign. Another reason to have it in this style is that it will allow all student family members to take advantage of this. PharmaCare is offering vaccination to anybody over the age, I think, of 6 months. So, even younger children, siblings who may not be Punahou students, parents can all be part of it. It's a really great way to sort of improve our vaccination coverage in our community.
Fantastic, thank you. My next question for you, Dr. Liu, is when school does resume face-to-face, which I think we're all hoping will be relatively soon, October, hopefully, would the school consider surveillance testing or any sort of cohort testing?
Yeah, we've gotten a lot of questions about testing, and we continue to sort of update our thinking on testing as new information becomes available. As you know, the landscape of testing and the types of tests that are available and how they can be used is changing continuously. So while it would be great to have that available, it's not a durable kind of measure of safety. So we could ask all people coming to campus to get tested at one point in time, and we would have a sense of at that time who might be positive, and we could keep them at home. But because we're not a closed campus, so anytime after that, it's possible that people can get infected in the other parts of their social network. And so that information might be really helpful at that point in time, but it won't be lasting, and we will continue to have to do these kinds of safety measures. And so what we're doing is, in thinking about what the options might be for using that kind of testing, is to think about the cost and the benefit, and whether that's a good place to put our resources, or whether the other measures that we have in place provide the kinds of prevention and mitigation that we think is in our control and really important against the cost of what that is. Right now, for the kind of testing that are available to us, we don't see that cost outweighing the benefit that we get from doing that. But we're continuing to evaluate that. And if there does come a time when testing is a lot less expensive, we could do it more frequently, it's less invasive and something acceptable, we certainly would consider it. But we would have to think about all that and the balance of all the measures that we're putting into place.
Thank you. We seem to have a great structure in place for the current pandemic. I think everybody is also, there are many questions about parents being hopeful about a vaccine coming out at some point. And so how does our academic landscape change in the event that a vaccine is available?
So I'll start there. I don't know if Dr. Latham wants to also comment on that, but of course we really hope that a vaccine becomes available. And the issue with the vaccine being available is who has access to it, how much does it cost, and how effective and durable is that vaccine? So there's a number of candidates that are being evaluated now. We see in the news that maybe something might be available in November, but we also see that that would be prioritized, at least in the current plan that the federal government has, to prioritize that for healthcare workers and other sort of first responders. And so any vaccine that comes out, of course, we would be really glad to know about it, but we really would have to understand issues around coverage in our community to see what impact that would have sort of in the prevalence of active disease that might be coming to campus. We'd have to think about how effective that vaccine is and just have those kinds of assurances. So it's something that we would evaluate, and then based on the type of vaccine product that is available and how it's distributed, we could make decisions about how does that influence in terms of where we think we are in the COVID alert tiers. So I think the design and the plan would stay constant, but this additional tool of a vaccine could help us decide if we would shift earlier to a lower level of alert if it's warranted.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that those really are the key variables for us to consider in terms of effectiveness, availability, cost. Obviously, we'd be looking for FDA approval and the other kinds of official indication that the vaccine was both effective and safe. I think that our hope is that all those things will fall into play because they really would be real assets. So at this point, we're gonna wait and see, but we're hopeful that those key pieces will come together.
Thank you. I have a few questions. I think they're by the same person about some of the UV filters. You mentioned that you put on the ventilation system. I think they're also wondering if you're putting some LED-based UV systems, maybe not just in the ventilation system, but around the school in general, maybe a walkthrough system. I don't really know exactly what that looks like. Is that something you've considered, Dr. Latham?
Ginny is probably closer to that work than I am. Ginny, maybe if you want to follow up on that one.
We did this summer. We did a pretty comprehensive facility assessment to assess, spaces, air systems, and all of those things. So the way our facilities, we've evaluated this building by building or space by space according to where we're planning to have classes and where students and employees will be. And so we've determined, especially in some of our newer buildings, we have a very sophisticated HVAC system, the kind of air exchange that's recommended to support, a safe environment. The use of the ion emitters and UV filters on those units, have already been built in, and so those newer buildings had been designed very safely and continue to be safe and meet the standard. And then some of the older buildings, those have also been evaluated very carefully, and those units have been retrofitted to have these types of ion emitters or UV filters. And what that's doing is it's an antivirucidal type of mechanism. And so as the air filters through these units, then they get purified and the virus is killed. And we believe that this is what we've chosen and what we've implemented in these systems are safe and sort of meet the standard and recommendations that we've seen in a number of guidance documents related to that.
Thank you. My next question probably can be answered by either Dr. PK or Dr. Liu. It's concerns about the small tablet screens, particularly in the lowest school, being potentially not so great for young children's eyes, and whether they can use a PC along with the tablet or instead of the tablet, or I don't know if you have a response to those.
I think that, one of the there are certain applications loaded on the tablets. I'm not sure how. I'm sorry, I don't have enough savvy to know whether or not how much of that that's loaded on the tablets can be transferred to another device. I think that's challenging because most of them are apps, or many of them are apps that are loaded onto the tablet. I guess the web-based stuff certainly can transfer. And here's the other thing. Any screen. We just want parents to be super attentive to the fact that if their children aren't able to, if they're getting headaches, if they're fatigued, we don't even want to get to that point. So, parents for a young child can expect 5, 10, 15 minutes longest screen time for that explicit instruction, and then they should leave before they experience that kind of fatigue. The direct instruction shouldn't last any more than that. And even if it lasts 10 minutes and a child has to leave before the 10 minutes is up, that's okay. We'll catch the kid up. So I just want to make sure that parents are sort of in the driver's seat with regard to that amount of screen time that children have to have. And I don't really understand what the difference is between an iPad and a PC in terms of fatigue. So I'm sorry, but certainly if that's an individual parent's concern, by all means, check in with the teacher or the dean and we'll know if it's a broad concern that we need to figure out a response to.
Thank you, Sonny. I do want to mention that we have about 5 minutes left. This has been a great, robust Q&A session, and maybe if you want to take a look and choose 1 or 2 more questions, and
this is kind of an interesting one that is not COVID related, but is for Dr. Liu, probably for what you thought you were being hired for initially. Well, now that we're in the online learning environment, there seems to be a lot of potential data analytics that we could be collecting because all grades and everything are online. So what data is collected and analyzed from Canvas or other apps, and how is that information shared with administrators, teachers, parents to discuss students' progress and any other student insights?
guess there's things that we might distinguish in the use of that kind of information. One is, charting the progress of an individual student, and certainly the faculty already have the tools that they need to look through Canvas and those apps and really see the progress of the child and how that contributes to their larger understanding of their interaction with the student. So at an individual student level, we really see that as centered with the faculty, the teacher working with the child. Whether there's a use for sort of that larger, bigger picture, thinking about how classes or grades move, overall, that's certainly something that we've considered in the past. I mean, these are tools that we have been using, and so there's room for that. But we would want to tailor that to sort of what are the specific kinds of questions that we're trying to answer. Something that we are able to look at more routinely from our data systems, and we've already started doing that with our IT department, is really thinking about how we can chart participation and attendance generally in the online the distance learning mode to get a sense of how good attendance is, whether people are really able to engage and participate at that level. And that would just be additional information to sort of augment and help the teachers and the deans think about how distance learning is going. So we really see that as a partnership driven by sort of the academic side in terms of what questions they're interested in looking at and how that can sort of round out the other information that they already have access to and are looking at.
I'll just add really quickly that we are so fortunate to have our incredible IT department who has built over the last couple of years, and certainly we've started using this talent in the last 6 months just really a lot. They've built us a series of dashboards for understanding student behavior in the online spaces, so we can look at things as a grade level, at a academy or division wide, and we are doing a lot of that and learning a ton. So we're so lucky that when we have a question about, okay, how can we learn about this experience of our students, given all the data that we're collecting, we have a team who can sort of build us dashboards that really help us make policy decisions that impact kids.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, so much. We are a minute away from 1 o'clock. The time has gone by so fast, and thank you for addressing many of our questions. And I know there are a lot more questions I'm sure that parents have. Is there a place where they can address questions to if they have additional questions that come up?
If there are COVID-related questions, especially related to our policies, we have a specific email for that. So it's the healthresponse@punahou.edu. I think it has been published in other of the updates as a help thing. So from a COVID policy standpoint, that would be a place that they could ask questions.
Thank you. And it sounds like if there's other classroom related questions or things like that, it sounds like it's appropriate to reach out to teachers as well as to deans. Is that correct, Paris and Emily?
Yep, that's just right. And there are a lot of questions here that we didn't get to. So if you had a specific question for any of us that you feel like we didn't respond to, we're happy to respond. So you can feel free to reach out to us as well.
And I just want to include the deans in that too. The deans are you're really strong advocates for your children and solve some of the broader kinds of issues that are arising.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, let me add my thanks to all the parents who attended this session. It's really terrific for us to have these questions in front of us. Really, this is the kind of dialogue that we learn from too. It's what helps us get better and stronger as we work alongside you all and educating your kids. And it's such a privilege to do that. So thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you so much, everybody. At one point, we had 350 attendees. So thank you to everybody who has tuned in. Thank you so much to Mike, Emily, Paris, Jinya. Thank you again to Nat helping us and Sani for moderating the Q&A section. Thank you, everybody, all the parents who have tuned in. It will be recorded and we will get it out to you. And we hope to see you next month. October 2nd will be our next monthly gathering. We promise to continue to improve on our monthly gatherings, add some new elements of interaction, hopefully, and we hope to see you then, if not before. But thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in, and have a great 3-day weekend. Thank you, everybody.